My father passed away on the day the desert wind cried. This is a quote from Abed El-Fatori, a survivor of nuclear testing. But not nuclear testing by America or Russia. El-Fatori survived France's nuclear testing in North Africa. But how did this come to be? Why were innocent civilians put in harm's way? And why have they still not gotten justice? This is a story of powerful people. It is a story of injustice and colonization. But more importantly, it's a story of real innocent people and how their lives were declared unmeaningful. This is the story of France's nuclear testing, and how dehumanization turns real people into nothing more than playthings. France began nuclear testing in 1960. But why? At the time, many world powers were developing nuclear weapons as a display of their power. As America and Russia were developing nuclear weapons at an increasing rate, other countries began scrambling to keep up with the arms race in an attempt to make themselves lesser targets. But there was just one problem. Nuclear testing requires a lot of empty space. France needed a huge amount of land that they didn't really care about. To find out where this land comes from, we need to go back a lot further than the 1960s. Since the 16th century, France created many colonies across the Americas, Africa, and Pacific, earning itself a place as one of the global superpowers of the time. One of these regions, Algeria, was under French control from 1830 to 1962, following an 8-year war for their independence. Algerian and French relations were never good, and there were many cases of extreme violence. In 1945, many Algerians began to fly nationalist flags, which led to a violent response from French officials. Shortly after, an unorganized rebellion led to the death of 82 French officials, and in response, somewhere between 8,000 and 45,000 Algerians were killed, accounts varying between French and Algerian sources. This slaughter would lead to the War of Independence less than a decade later.
Algeria's War for Independence began in October 1954. After a rebellion in 1955 that led to the deaths of almost 100 officials, somewhere between 1,200 and 12,000 Algerians were once again killed in response. This pattern was repeated throughout the war, and in 1961, French and Algerian officials began negotiations. France eventually agreed to Algerian independence as long as it won the majority of the vote. Algerians then showed incredible support for independence, with roughly 6 million votes in favor of independence and only 16,000 votes against it. Though Algeria did eventually become free, there is still much controversy around the colonization and oppression that Algerians faced. French sources claim 300,000 to 500,000 Algerian casualties throughout the war, while Algerian sources claim 1.5 million. France's testing of nuclear weapons didn't begin until 1960, 5.5 years into Algeria's War of Independence, and the test didn't end until 1966. 4 years after Algeria's gained independence. How was France able to do this? When the War for Independence was coming to an end, French and Algerian officials signed the Evian Accords, which fortified the terms of their agreement. However, in the Evian Accords, there was also a clause that allowed for France to continue their nuclear testing on Algerian soil, even though they had agreed to move their military from Algeria.
The first test took place on February 13th, 1960. The name of the bomb? Gerboise Bleu, blue desert rodent. The bomb was detonated in the Regan region of southern Algeria, and its power was the equivalent of 70 kilotons of TNT. It released 4 times the amount of energy that Little Boy released in Hiroshima. It affected an area stretching from Mali and Nigeria to southern Spain and Italy. The explosion buried people and houses, and it had immediate effects. That year, acid rain fell, and a deadly fever swept the area, killing families. People in Fezzan, an area of southwestern Libya, became infected with ophthalmia, an eye infection, so much that 1960 became known as the year of ophthalmia in that region. Between 27,000 and 60,000 Algerians were affected by radiation, and France conducted 17 total tests in the Algerian desert, 4 of them in the atmosphere near Regan. Witnesses described them as the most brutal thing they'd ever seen in their lives. But France refused to acknowledge the harm that they had caused. They insisted that the affected area was much smaller than it actually was, doing anything they could to hide it from the people there. They were able to keep it a secret until the French newspaper Le Parisien uncovered secret documents in 2014 that revealed the true depth of their actions, the true area that was affected by the radiation. When people living in this area requested that the French government remove any irradiated surface debris and uncover underground radiation, France ignored them. The French government only started compensating victims in 2009, but it was very difficult for the victims to access the system due to the restrictive eligibility requirements. In other affected countries like Libya, research into damage done by tests has been very difficult due to interference from authorities from France, Algeria, and Libya.
The public became aware of the true size of the affected area in the Sahara when Le Parisien uncovered classified documents in 2014, over 5 decades after the tests were performed. But Algeria wasn't the only colony impacted by France's nuclear testing. France took control of French Polynesia, formerly known as Tahiti, in 1842 and made it a colony in 1880. Unlike in Algeria, French Polynesia became an official French territory in 1946. France conducted 193 nuclear tests in the South Pacific between 1966 and 1996, with many taking place on the atolls of Mororo and Mangatofa. The people of French Polynesia were not given a say in the decision to conduct the tests, and were not warned of the risks associated with exposure to radiation. The French government minimized the impacts of the nuclear tests on the health and well-being of the people of French Polynesia, denying or downplaying the risks of radiation exposure. The French government even obscured the harm of their tests from their own citizens, as Bernard Reynolds, a former French soldier, recalled in this interview.
Les autorités vous avez prévenu de la dangerosité de votre métier à ce moment-là, à cet endroit-là?
Jamais. Jamais.
According to a confidential report from the Polynesian Health Ministry, about 11,000 victims of the test received radiation doses greater than 5 millisieverts, 5 times the qualifying levels for compensation. Based on the documents declassified in 2013, however, the researchers calculated that the entire population of Tahiti and the Polynesian Leeward Islands, roughly 110,000 people, was exposed to a radiation dose of more than 1 millisievert from just one of the 193 nuclear tests.
Rates of cancer and other health problems are higher in French Polynesia than that in other parts of the world, and the French government has been slow to acknowledge the connection between these health problems and the nuclear tests. France has so far compensated just 454 people, including only 63 local inhabitants, rejecting more than 80% of the claims. Tests show that people present at nuclear tests were exposed to radiation equivalent to that of 1,000 chest x-rays, not including inhaled radiation from the sand, which causes cancer. 45 years later, tests were conducted and it was still irradiated, but there was no warning or fencing to inform people of the radioactivity. The French government saw its nuclear weapons program as a critical tool to secure its strategic interests and maintain its status as a world power, and found Algeria to be a suitable location for testing its nuclear arsenal due to its history as a French colony. The French government's willingness to use Algerians as expendable subjects in the pursuit of nuclear weapons program reflects the broader attitudes of colonization, and has so far paid compensation to just 454 people, rejecting more than 80% claims without even providing a reason for the rejection. The well-being of colonized people was considered less important than that of the colonizers. The French government's lack of recognition or even acknowledgement of the harm caused by the nuclear testing program in Algeria is a continuation of its disregard for the lives and well-being of the Algerian people. The French government and military dehumanized people of French Polynesia in order to justify its nuclear tests, viewing them as expendable and inferior. The French government used colonial attitudes and practices to control and dominate the people of French Polynesia, treating them as subjects rather than citizens with rights. The legacy of nuclear testing in French Polynesia is a reminder of the ongoing impact of colonization and the importance of acknowledging and addressing the historical and ongoing harm caused by colonization. The historical legacy of colonization and dehumanization have had enduring impacts on nuclear testing, as exemplified by France's testing in Algeria and French Polynesia. The lack of accountability and compensation for those impacted by France's nuclear testing highlights the ongoing disregard for the lives and well-being of colonized people. These tests not only caused devastating ecological and health effects on the local populations and ecosystems, but also reinforced the broader colonial legacy of exploitation and marginalization. In order to address the impacts of colonization, dehumanization, and nuclear testing, it is crucial for governments and societies to not only acknowledge the past and present harm, but to actively work towards the prevention of further harm. This includes providing reparations for those affected by France's nuclear testing in Algeria and French Polynesia, as well as implementing policies and practices that prioritize the well-being of colonized people. Ultimately, recognition, accountability, and efforts toward reparations and prevention are essential to heal the wounds caused by colonization, dehumanization, and nuclear testing, and to create a more equitable world for all.